Hello, and welcome to the second session in a three-part series to provide information and education on the Church Hub. On behalf of the Pastoral Relations Commission, I welcome you to this session. Hello, my name is Susan Silverthorne, and I'll be supporting Earl tonight during this session. Before we go any further, I also wanted to give thanks to Kathy Jackson, who is working in the background and has been an integral part of this team. So thanks to Kathy for that. The product of tonight eventually will be a recording, so you can go back and look at it. And we'll also share all of Earl's PowerPoints. And at some point in time, I will be going into your resources, and you'll see a list of resources tonight. I'll be going into those and finding the actual page numbers, the document and the page number that you need to go to find a particular topic. And we'll send that document out to you at some point in time before the end of the month. So know that you don't have to take notes on a furious basis because you'll have access to the notes from tonight and the product of the ideas that all of you have put forward. So just as a reminder for those who weren't here last week, what we covered were practicing holy manners, roles and responsibilities of the different players that contribute to a community of faith profile and or recruitment, development of a living faith story. We showed a video that showed people building an airplane in the air, and sometimes writing your living faith story feels exactly like building an airplane in the air, because we don't have good tight guidelines and rules for how to do that. And so we're learning from each other as we go in developing those stories and looking at some best practices or better practices. The topics that we're going to cover tonight include considerations in planning for a change in pastoral care relations. So how is it different when someone is retiring versus there's been a disciplinary issue, as looking at maybe two extremes? What do we need to think about? Key components in a search. What do we need to think about? Fair interview practices. We have to be really careful about making sure that we have an even playing field and not introducing biases because we have inadvertently not designed a fair recruitment process or interview process. Considerations to think about in terms of an admissions candidate. What do we need to think about with admissions candidates, and what do we need to think about supervised ministry education? What are those considerations that you're going to want to think about? And so as we roll this out tonight, what we're asking you to do is to do some mental gymnastics to understand these ideas, but your real role is to be a coach. So there are two parts to this. It's, do you understand the topic and the content? And then do you have questions that you can ask that will prompt your congregations then to be able to do some mental gymnastics with this and understand what the issues are? So there are two sides to the coin in terms of the learning tonight. Earl, how is it going?
It's going. So good to see all of you. Thank you again for taking the time to come and be with us this evening. Thank you, Susan, for welcoming everybody in. All right. So let's just begin here then. The search and selection process. This slide, a little bit of humor here for you. Basically, it says, basically, we're looking for an innovative pastor with fresh vision who will inspire our church to remain exactly the same. It doesn't actually come across all the time that way, but there are times when I get calls from ministry personnel about 3 or 4 months into their new pastoral relationship, and they're just reassessing what it is that their ministry in this place is going to be, because what was written in the former Jane Acts didn't always reflect what the ministry needs were in a community. And so I do get calls that are somewhat along this line, that how they describe themselves isn't how I'm finding them to be, and the things they said they wanted to do, maybe there aren't the resources to do that. Maybe it's just not possible in the community, an aging community, to have a youth group and a children's program. So the ministers have to kind of, as we have been using the word, have to pivot and adapt to what's going on. The denomination, just to begin this evening, provides a lot of resources on pastoral relations. So for you folks, the main ones are going to be, if you're doing liaison work for the regional council, then the handbook on regional council liaisons is going to be important. If you are a member of the board or a community of faith on a search team, for instance, it's these other ones that are going to be more helpful to you. And so that's the policies for the community of faith, the guidelines for the profile, the guidelines for search and selection. Also just want to briefly mention intentional interim ministry. In the United Church of Canada, intentional interim ministry or interim ministry is actually a technical term. And people often will say, well, we need an interim minister. And then I'll have to ask them, well, is there some particular reason why you would need an interim minister as opposed to a supply minister? And so the terms are kind of confused in our vocabulary, but in the church, an interim minister is someone who's undertaken a program that prepares them to go into a community of faith and serve probably for 2 or 3 years, taking the community of faith through a program of rehabilitation or remediation. And so it's a very specific kind of program that they do. Whereas a supply minister is somebody who comes in, maybe is appointed for a year or 2 or more, but basically it's like a supply teacher. It's not the permanent teacher, but it's somebody who comes in and fills in while some kind of absence is going on for in the ministry personnel. So these resources are available on the United Church of Canada website. Northern Spirit Regional Council, we want to make you aware, has its own policies as well, and these are specifically for our regional council. Other regional councils may have similar policies dealing with the same subjects, but they might be a bit differently written, different emphases and things because of the context. So, we do want you to know that there are policies that the communities of faith in our regional council are asked to comply with. And you can see some of them here. Policy on the length of appointments basically says that supply ministers can be appointed for 1 year at a time, unless they're in the admissions process, and then it's 3 years that they can be appointed, and that's because of immigration concerns. Streams of ministry eligibility policy is one that says that when a congregation posts its community of faith profile and position description, we want them to accept applications from ordained ministers, diaconal ministers, designated lay ministers, and leave it up to the search committee to determine if one particular stream of ministry is suited for that position. In other words, we don't want, early on we had a couple of position descriptions come in and they said, we want an ordained minister. And the Pastoral Relations Commission thought there may be some diaconal ministers or a designated lay minister who would serve them very well, and they won't know that if they don't accept applications from those people. And so we just wanted to make sure that that when a position's posted, anybody in any stream of ministry can apply for it. So it's things like that that are in our policies. We also have some guidelines as well and some other resources. So these might be particularly of interest to ministry and personnel committees. For instance, managing overtime in a community of faith. The treasurers and others might be interested in a couple of funding options that are there. And the marriage license thing is always an important one to be aware of, particularly because about a year ago, the provincial government, the Vital Statistics Office, told us that we can no longer call them up and say, oh, by the way, one of our ministers who doesn't have an active license to marry did a wedding last week. And they used to kind of give us grace for that. And now they're saying, if somebody doesn't have a license to marry and they do perform a wedding, that's going to be a problem, because they're now going to have to go to the couple and say, actually, you're not, I wasn't licensed, and now you have to get what do they call it, affidavit, in order to recognize your wedding ceremony. So it's really important for people on boards, especially, to know that that people need to be licensed before they do weddings. Seems to make sense, but well, so kind of with that bit of introduction, now we're going to move our focus into the subject matter for this evening. And so I do invite you at this point just to, if you need to close off your camera, do that. If you just want to close your eyes, that's fine. If you want to just kind of relax where you are, I invite you to just take a moment to sit quietly and to take some deep breaths, remembering that the Spirit of God is the breath of life. The Spirit is around us always. It's we who need to come into the Spirit's presence with our souls, because the Spirit is always there, from before the beginning and past the end times. God surrounds us as the beloved people, His creation, His children. God surrounds us like a mother cares and nurtures her children. and teaches them life lessons. As the grandmother experiences joy from her grandchildren's experience. We pray that this evening, as we're gathered together from very far-flung places, really, through this means of being together, that the Spirit will be in each of us and all of us together as the community of faith of Northern Spirit Regional Council. So we open our hearts and our minds to the Spirit of God as we come into this evening as friends and colleagues and neighbors and fellow pilgrims on the way. Amen.
Our next topic is going to involve a quiz on streams of ministry to test your knowledge. Earl will be walking you through the quiz, and I suggest that you get ready by having a pen and paper handy so that you can answer the questions.
The first question was, so you can just mark it on paper if you didn't have a chance to do it online. Some ministers are ordained to, number 1, word, sacrament, and pastoral care. Answer number 2 is word and sacrament. Answer number 3 is wordle, sacrament, and pastoral care. And answer number 4 is word, sacrament, and pastoral shepherding. And I'm pleased to see that most people chose the correct answer, which is word, sacrament, and pastoral care. And although wordle is very popular, and I'm sure a lot of ministers do that one. Our next question then, and I'll read it out as those who can see it online are responding. Diaconal ministers are commissioned to education, service, and pastoral care, word, sacrament, and pastoral care. Number 3, education, serving, and pastoral care. Number 4, pastoral care, service, and occupation.
And just to be clear, there's a typo there. It's not diagonal ministers, is it? Is that?
No. No.
It's actually not a typo.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that
Oh,
right?
it's something you want.
Because we don't have diagonal ministers, there is no such thing, so all of them are false.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
They have to endure that teasing, so I thought I would just, continue the teasing. So in fact, diaconal ministers are commissioned to a ministry of education, service, and pastoral care. And we have several diaconal ministers on with us this evening. So that's those are your answers there. So there is information that's available about the streams of ministry, and if you're working with a congregation as a pastoral relations liaison, or if you're on a search team, then to become familiar with the different designations is a very important thing. The training of a diaconal minister, their area of focus may be quite suitable to the kind of ministry that your congregation is looking for, kind of leadership. Likewise, there are gifts to the education and the formation that an ordained minister has gone through that might make them particularly suitable to ministry leadership where you are. So we want you to be aware that the training, the focus of the ministry is different, and yet our ordered ministers and our designated lay ministers are certainly very capable of the leadership that they offer to communities of faith. So, and being able to, if you're working with your own congregation or another one, to be able to have some familiarity with the streams of ministry is going to be valuable. Here's number 3. This one, for those of you who aren't able to see it online, says, candidates can serve a supervised ministry education placement. Number 1, while vacationing in Aruba. Number 2, while in a supply ministry position. Number 3, after they have completed their studies. And number 4, after the second year of their studies. This is a bit of a trick question too. I'm glad to see that nobody chose while vacationing in Aruba, because that's actually the only answer that's wrong. Candidates for ministry do serve as student supply ministers. If they're at the Atlantic School of Theology, for instance, doing the summer distance program, they serve from the beginning of their education time and preparation time right through to the end. At some other colleges, and happening more now, you complete your entire educational program before you go on your practicum placement, your supervised ministry education placement. And we have a couple the program at St. Stephen's, because the supervised ministry education is part of their educational program, they do it after their second year of studies and continue until the end. So that one, I'm throwing a couple of trick questions at you here too. Here's another one about retired ministers. So this question says, retired ministers can, number 1, retired ministers are not eligible to serve in ministry positions in communities of faith. Number 2, can preside at marriages anywhere and anytime. Number 3, can preside at marriage services if they are named as an honorary associate. And number 4, are not accountable to the office of vocation. So number 1, retired ministers are eligible to serve in ministry positions in communities of faith. Most recently, what they have to do is they have to re-engage their pension plan contributions if they do that. And so we're now calling them re-engaged pensioners. And just yet another term in the United Church. But they can serve in retired supply appointments. They cannot perform marriages anywhere and everywhere. They need to be licensed by the regional council, and the regional council is obliged to ensure that they are in formal association with some congregation somewhere, and before they can perform a wedding, and they can only do that if we issue them a license. So they can't just pick up and do marriage services anytime. But they can have an ongoing license to marry if they become an honorary associate or enter that formal association with the congregation. And indeed, right up until they're in a vocation, and it's a lifelong vocation, ministry personnel, and they are always accountable to the Office of Vocation of the United Church of Canada. So most of you got that one. That's great. Final question. And this question is about congregational designated ministers. They are, number one, employed by the Regional Council. Number two, they are authorized to be appointed to communities of faith. Did I say number three? This is number three. They're employed by a local governing council. And number four, they are very good at coordinating church suppers. This is a designation in the United Church that is not well known in every place. And so you're forgiven if you are questioning what the answers are. A congregational designated minister is a lay person who is employed by the board or the council of a local church. So number two is correct. Number three is correct. They're employed by the local governing body, so the official board, the church council, to do a very specific programming sort of ministry in the church. So you might have a congregational designated minister who does the children's programming in a congregation, or who does some seniors ministry, but it's for a very specific kind of ministry, and they are responsible, they're accountable to the local official board, local governing body, not to the regional council, and they are not eligible for appointment as the minister of a community of faith. So how do you think you did? The next topic that we want to move into has to do with the ending of pastoral relationships. And the usual way for a pastoral relationship to end is with the minister discerning that their time in working with this community of faith has come to an end. They may feel that it's time for somebody else to bring gifts that they have to the leadership of that congregation and to walk with them as they develop into a faithful community and continue their ministry and mission. And it may be partly a call to a different place that's causing the minister to discern that it's time to move on. And so the usual way is for the minister to write a letter to, and you learned this last week, to the official board of the church or the local governing body, the regional council, and the office of vocation, to let them know that they're wanting to make a change in pastoral relations. There are other circumstances, though, that give rise to the end of a pastoral relationship. One of them is, and we're aware of this one a lot in our current situation, is when finances or other resources, maybe just the people resources in a community of faith are waning, and so there's a cutback to the amount of ministry that a community of faith can support, and that might lead the minister then to decide to search another position. A happier occasion, of course, is retirement. And that seems to be happening a lot lately. And so retirements, they're not this, they have a different dynamic than just the regular moving on to another pastoral charge, because it is kind of a, oh gosh, we get to be the last place that this person serves in their active ministry career. And so it's celebratory. Sometimes there are disciplinary issues that give rise to the ending of a pastoral relationship, some kind of pastoral misconduct, or some other sort of boundary crossing that happens. And for disciplinary reasons, the Office of Vocation will ask us to end a pastoral relationship. And sometimes moving along to, if somebody is on a medical leave for a long time, after 2 years of being on medical leave, the community of faith is permitted then to ask that the pastoral relationship be ended so that another minister can be sought. So what we're wanting you to do, we're going to ask room 1 and 2 to just talk about if the last pastoral relationship has ended because of a waning in resources, what are the issues that you might need to raise for the search team as they look at their future? Okay, so that's group 1 and 2. What are the issues around the ending of a pastoral relationship because of waning resources? Group 3 and 4, we're going to ask you to look at, let's see, retirement. What are the issues that are going to arise when a minister retires? And that can be, think of it in terms of, it could be a long time that the minister's been there and now they're retiring. So what does the community of faith need to be aware of? What are the issues? So we're on 5 and 6. We're going to give you the disciplinary questions. What are the things when there's been a rough ending to a pastoral relationship? What are the issues that need to be considered in looking into the future? And group number 7, you get long-term disability. When a minister's been sick for a long period of time, 2 years before we can end the pastoral relationship, what are the issues for going ahead?
So we're going to do a rapid round robin. We're going to ask each group to report out 1 or 2 ideas, and then we'll move to the next group. If you've got a long list, and we hope that you do, we're going to ask that your reporter email those into Kathy, and then we'll get those into the notes. So can we hear from group 1?
So we were looking at a change of pastoral relation due to lack of resources. We have a very long list, which has already gone to Kathy. When was your last stewardship process? Have you talked to the neighbors? How is your ministry different now? What's changed?
Hey, thanks. That was good and rapid, Ruth. Thanks. Group 2.
Would that be the bananas? So what we came up with, we came up with a few, and if you have waning resources, we're looking at probably part-time ministry, which could be a challenge for geographically dispersed locations.
Okay. Anything else that you want to bring out?
Sure. That would require a change in focus, and that would depend on what the congregation wants, whether they want to re-energize or just maintain or let the community wane a bit.
Okay, thanks. Group 3 addressed retirement. What ideas did you come up with?
We were talking about if the minister retiring was a long-term relationship with the community of faith, that they need to look at ways of doing things, new opportunities in different ways, rather than, as Peter said, falling into the ruts of the old minister. And to honor and respect and finish on a good note, and to recognize the work and appreciate the minister that's retiring for service. And sometimes a gap in between the old minister and the new is a good idea, just to be able to bring new ideas to the forefront.
Thanks, Linda.
You're welcome.
Group 4.
We talked, we didn't have a lot of time, so just two things that came to our plates. First, when a minister retires, perhaps it might be wise to have a buffer between the retired minister and whoever is to come. So we talked about interim ministry or supply ministry, just to give a bit of a break. And then we also talked about boundaries, and the question came up, what if the retired minister stays in the community? And so it was shared that the retired minister is responsible for maintaining those boundaries and not be sticking their nose in to the pastoral charge and the new minister's work.
Okay. Thanks very much, Debbie. Group 5 looked at end of the relationship due to disciplinary action. Can you name a couple of issues?
Well, we talked about the most important thing is looking at the health and well-being of the pastoral charge that needs to be assessed. And often a transitional minister is appointed to help it heal. A lot of gossip and innuendo by others that would have to be dealt with. People have a long-term memory around the situation. It's no easy solution or way out. A lot of hard work. Professional perspective is needed to help the healing. We have looked at a truth and reconciliation process might be required, see it through to the very end, and be a fair process where everybody is heard. And other issues, one other issue to look at is that other issues might surface from other times, from previous ministers. Well, I remember this and I remember that, and it was never resolved. So that's some of the things we talked about.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Group 6. You can name anything new.
Okay, so we thought that it would be important to have a temporary interim minister to serve between the time the disciplinary action resulted in the discharge of a minister and the hiring of a new one. So whether that was a 1.5-year time or a 2-year time, the regional council probably gives advice about that, because the congregation would need time for grieving, for recovery, and getting over feelings of disappointment. And to build up trust again within the community would take time.
Okay. Thanks very much, Colleen. And group 7 addressed long-term disability.
We talked about the expectation is that the community is not there to care for the minister. The minister is there to care for the community. So you need clear expectations in a job description. Healing needs to happen, probably some counseling and grief work. And the congregation will probably be needing to give up control and jobs they had to take on while the minister was ill.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I didn't catch who was speaking there, so I couldn't name that. Earl, do you want me to go on and introduce the next exercise?
Yes, just wanted to say that I appreciate the comments, particularly with the disciplinary ending and the medical leave ending, about the idea of an interim minister in there. or a transitional minister, which is somebody who's not got the formal training but has the pastoral skills to do that. What we find is that kind of those traumas remain in a community, in that they become a part of the spirit of the community and can have an ongoing effect on its decision making and its the way people treat each other. And so it is important to acknowledge that those take healing, time to heal from that. Susan,
Okay.
what's
so-
it, Triz?
Yeah, so we're going to turn things upside down right now. And we're going to think about, for the situation that your group addressed, what could you do to make sure that you failed spectacularly? So I'm going to use the example of making sure that I cannot deal with a flat tire. Well, I'm going to make sure I don't have my spare, or I don't have my spare pumped up. I don't have a jack. I've got my lug nuts too tight and I can't loosen them. So, as soon as we think of all of those things that would cause us to fail, right away, we begin to understand pretty clearly what we need to put in place to succeed. So we're going to ask you to go back into your groups and think about all the things you could do to fail. This is a two-part thing. So I think we'll ask Kathy to give you a warning so that you don't spend all of your time on step one. And then we want you to think about elements that you need to put in place to lead to success. So turning it right side up and thinking about, well, what exactly do you need to ensure that you're coaching your congregation to do to ensure success? So any questions about that? All right. So Kathy, I'm going to say break people up into their room. So you're using the same topic that you used in the last round. Welcome back, folks. So we're going to do a rapid round robin again. So we're going to go backwards this time. We're going to start with room 7, Gumtree. And again, this is a rapid round robin. So give 2 ideas, if you will, and then write down the rest of them, send those to Kathy so that we can capture all of the ideas. So Gumtree, you want to give your ideas?
How could we fail not being critical and asking the right questions of the returning minister? Can you still do this job? Keeping the elephant in the room, not talking about the issues. And for success, clear boundaries and a code of conduct for the congregation and the minister on the return, a covenant of holy manners. Is it still a fit? If not, find resources to have an amicable separation.
Okay, thanks. And I should have told the rest of the group, group 7 addressed long-term disability. So group 6, who addressed disciplinary action. So what would you do to ensure success? Couple of ideas.
Tell the new minister where the good stuff was and where the transition was. Celebrating what worked with the previous minister, and hire a counselor to figure out how to communicate to the congregation. That was how we would look at success. Failure, if you don't tell a new minister about the previous issues, you're ambushing them, and not getting professional counseling.
Okay, thanks, group 6. Group 5. And again, this is a change due to disciplinary action.
Yes, to really ensure failure, pretend it never happened, and then look for another minister as soon as possible. And then blame everyone else. And then for success, we have this, just a few points. We had a lot of points. Have the courage to know you need help, and ensure that there's regular communication to the community of faith. And pastoral care may be needed for congregational members, and we should be offered either individually or in groups. And clarity required regarding everyone's roles and responsibilities.
Okay, lots of good ideas. Group 4, minister is retiring.
What could go wrong? People might think that the new minister will be like the retired minister. People think that they can carry on with what was. Did the search committee misread new minister? And then as for what could go well, the congregation have an open mind, a commitment to go with the new minister and who they are, how they are, and where they're hoping to lead. And an encouragement to take time when searching.
Okay, thanks very much. Group 2, change of pastoral relations due to lack of resources.
I'll give 2 of each.
Great.
So the things you can do to fail is still to continue to do everything the way you always have when you had the resources. The second is don't come up with a budget. Bury your head in the sand and hope it goes away. Elements to put in place to ensure success is to be honest with what your resources are, and show good leadership through understanding the grief and the guilt of basically the vision not coming to fruition.
Okay, thanks. And group 1, again, change of relations due to lack of resources.
Lie on your community of faith profile and reassure everyone that the National Church will rescue you. Those were our failures that haven't been mentioned. Encouraging people to listen for God's call and dream. Some time of discernment. Who are we in the community? Do we matter? And if not, why? And can we change that?
Okay, thank you very much.
I think we might have missed group 3 in that last
Oh,
round.
I'm
Did we?
sorry. Did we? I'm so sorry. I'm always afraid I'm going to do that very thing. So can we go back to group 3 and hear from you?
Now
And
we'll do it really quick. We struggled with the failure and the succeed question. So Peter talked about most ministers will give a long time for their announcement of their retirement, but the congregation may decide they want them gone after 90 days. And one way for sure to promote failure is don't clap and say hallelujah when they announce their retirement in church. And for success, we basically went back to all the reasons we gave for our first question, just how to be supportive and welcoming and whatever to the person that is going to retire and not to beg them to stay.
okay,
Or
thanks
them to
very
go.
much. And my apologies to group 3.
No problem.
Okay. Now you
Great, thanks, Susan. So when we come to the interview process, the application and interview process, one of the things that I'd like to highlight at this point is some of the manners, good manners that we would expect a search team to use. And it's surprising how sometimes you just don't think of these things, but important to do so. So when people are applying for a position, whether you're even beyond the time of application, you're past your submission date, no matter what, if they've sent you an application, please acknowledge that you've received their application. We hear sometimes of people who send applications in and don't hear anything. They don't even know if the community of faith received it. Particularly and we'll talk about this a little later on, but for ministers from overseas who may be making a lot of applications, and very important just to acknowledge that you've received it. If the search team decides not to proceed with a candidate, so you get the application, you decide, no, this person's not going forward in our process, then tell them promptly, like, right away that, thank them for submitting their application and let them know that they're not going to be interviewed. So be really clear about that. If the search team decides to move forward with a particular individual, then let the person know when they can be expected to be contacted about arrangements. So it's just all of this has to do with timing and just making sure that your committee, your team is giving people good expectations about when things are going to happen. It may not be for 3 weeks, but tell them that. It's going to be a long time. Don't wait until week 2.5 to tell them that, oh, we're going to interview you, partly because you might lose them as an applicant in that case. But when a minister is looking for a position, it is a time of anxiety and just knowing that knowing how things are going to play out is really helpful. And it also makes a good impression on them at indicating that this might be a congregation that I would want to work with. I'm going to just watch a video. We give thanks to our colleagues in the United Church of Christ for producing a couple of videos that we'll watch this evening. just want to spend a little time reviewing issues around human rights in interviews. And the church, we want to be a good corporate citizen. We want to be a good employer. And so that's why we willingly abide by human rights legislation and how it's described in the various provincial human rights acts and territorial ones as well. And so we expect our search teams, like we would expect elsewhere in society, to not inquire or not make decisions based on people's age, their marital status, their abilities, their sexual orientation, and now we would also add in sexual identity or their racial identity or their gender. There's one human right category that we are allowed to inquire into, and that for communities of faith, of course, is religious belief. You are allowed to ask questions around theology and spirituality and such in ours, and that's because it's a condition of employment. And so that exempts us from that particular human right, which wouldn't be appropriate in other venues. We want to talk a little bit about arranging interviews now. So we've talked a bit about preparing. When it comes to actually getting the interview set up, now we're finding, and especially during COVID, we're finding that interviews are often held by video conference. And so we'd ask you, and again particularly, we'd ask you to make arrangement to meet with the person at a time when they're going to be presenting themselves well. And this might be particularly tricky if you're interviewing somebody who's in Zimbabwe or other parts of the globe. And but we do want you just to make sure that you're in a awake frame of mind or an alert frame of mind, and they are as well. Particularly, what we're wanting to do is make sure that everybody, as far as possible, is being interviewed on a level playing field. So if you're going to have somebody local come in for an interview, then you need to make sure that someone from away is going to be equally rested and fed and ready for the interview. Give lots of time to set up the connections. I should be talking, lots of time to do test runs. Make sure that your bandwidth is wide enough and your screens are where they're supposed to be and such. Do a test run if you're going to do online interviews. Make sure that that's going to be comfortable and doesn't interfere with some applicants' interview. And then after the interview, whether the person's in person or online, let them know when they're going to hear from you. Okay? Again, it's surprising the number of times that I hear, well, I was interviewed 2 weeks ago and haven't heard anything. And so we want to make sure that you tell them, again, if it's going to be 2 weeks, tell them it's going to be 2 weeks. At least they'll know then what to expect and won't be sitting anxiously. So then when you move on to the second interview, probably going to be interviewing about 2 or 3 people on your short list. So let the individuals know that their references will be checked before the second interview. so that they can alert appropriate people. Very important to do reference checks. We know that all our ministry personnel need to have a police record check and are, are aware of boundaries, training, and things like that. But the reference check is actually where you're going to really find the most helpful, supportive, or not supportive information about this individual. Ask permission to speak with the chairperson of the board or the chairperson of ministry and personnel of their current pastoral charge. If they're uncomfortable doing that, then can we speak to somebody from your past pastoral charge? Those are kind of two positions that you want to have some conversation with. Those comments can then help you to focus the questions that you're going to ask in the second interview. If at all possible, hold the second interview in person. And here we just like to mention that what you do for one candidate, you need to do for all the candidates, all the people that you're interviewing. So if you're going to interview one of your applicants online because they're at a distance, you need to interview all your applicants online, even if one of them is in the next town. That's just fair. So be consistent in what you're asking people, the questions you're asking people, and be consistent also in the venue that you're using to do your interviews. And finally, cover all the costs of somebody who's coming for an interview. If you're having them travel, make sure that all their costs are covered, their travel, their accommodation, their meals, and reimburse them promptly. Again, there are several stories about people who say, well, it's been 3 months and I haven't received any reimbursement. And then we have that awkward conversation of, do they know they're to reimburse you? So just want to make sure that all those things are very clear for you. Is there a question in the chat that I'm to be responding to, Susan?
Yes, there is. So there was a question about what do you mean about ability, that we can't ask about ability, and the chat back and forth was focusing on differently abled, that's what you were referring to, not competencies for the job.
Yeah, no, certainly competency is something you want to get a impression of. That was referring to to health related information. So again, thanks to the United Church of Christ for providing us with this. We're going to be talking now about the admissions process, or admission of ministry personnel from other denominations. So this, and we have very glad to have some of our admissions ministers with us. Dorcas McCutha is near in the crowd there somewhere, and Lloyd Neuroda. We're very blessed to have these people come to us. So we want to talk a little bit about the issues that folks who are coming from different denominations face, and this might be coming from a different denomination within Canada, so somebody transferring in from the Presbyterian Church or the Anglican Church, but it could also, in addition to coming from a different denomination, could involve coming from a different culture and climate, and so just want to highlight the issues of folks in the admissions process, because and particularly since the end of the settlement process, where new ministers were placed in pastoral charges, since we don't have that anymore, we're really, at this point in our history as a denomination, and in this regional council in particular, we're looking to the globe and other denominations in other parts of the world to welcome ministry personnel here and ask them to be part of the ministry that we're doing in this regional council.
To stretch and move toward the gifts and skills that someone new offers. Every minister has a unique calling. Ministers of all races, at different times, engage particular issues, have particular outreach, and cultivate unique strategies for personal resilience as well. Leaders of color stretch and move between all races, following God's call to justice and wholeness. What perceptions are you holding? Are they justified? Through grace and discipleship, people within the church will embrace their pastor's gifts at different moments and at different levels of comfort and discomfort. Resources of support for your congregation exist, including further materials from the United Church of Christ. Pastoral search committees are encouraged to commit to prayer and discernment and expand the pool of candidates for serious consideration during the interview process. Growth can come to a congregation that combats stereotypes with the help of God. Spiritual growth can come from surprising sources. Now is a time to acknowledge how bias is normalized in society and to identify faithful commitments toward justice for all God's people. On your search committee, yours is a sacred opportunity for discernment as part of the people of God. Your opportunities as a faith community go beyond how the minister might be the same as or different from you. Leadership is complex and profound, involving movement and relationship, invitation, communication, and constant mutual learning. The most important question is, how can the congregation and the minister join together to let the love of God flow?
I want to just take a little time to think about the gifts and graces, and that's a phrase that Lloyd has offered to me, and that I find myself using a lot. But the gifts and graces that people from global settings can bring to a community of faith. I remember speaking to a minister who had come to us from offshore a number of years ago, and he had come into a congregation that was very welcoming, and they they embraced him, and he happened to be a man, and his family. And after a while, he said to me, they seem to be so prepared for me coming to be a part of the community. They, help me find medical resources and banking resources and get a car and do all the moving in things. He said, but the thing that they weren't prepared for was what I could bring to them. And so recognizing that the church all over the world is very different, and will grow in richness as we listen to the ideas that come from different places. Right now we're starting discussions, and you'll hear about this in a while, about area ministry. So if you think back to the Methodists and the circuits that ministers worked in, where they were responsible for a number of congregations, working with the lay people to kind of be there when the minister can't be there. This is a kind of an idea that we're really listening to people who have experience with that form of ministry in other parts of the world, and what they can bring to us and teach us about how to make that kind of a system work. And so as our resources are waning in terms of the number of people going into ministry, this is the kind of thing that we're going to be needing to look at, and other people can reassure us that it will be okay, that it works, and help us to understand how to set it up. So we really are at this point the receivers of gifts and graces from around the world. When orchestras are auditioning, I'm told, I haven't ever done this myself, but I'm told that they'll often have the musician play behind a curtain. And that way they listen to the quality and color of the sound that the person is making on their instrument, without the bias of seeing the individual. They don't know whether it's a man or a woman. They don't know if they fit the image of the orchestra or whatever. But it's a way of ensuring that everybody has a fair opportunity for the position. And so it's kind of a good image, I think, for us to hold in terms of how can we, as far as possible, create that kind of unbiased atmosphere for the interviews that we're offering. So. One thing that we wanted to talk about just briefly is around the issue of confidentiality in search. And this is something that I think search teams wrestle with quite a bit, not knowing, kind of trying to keep things confidential, and then congregational members feeling they're keeping secrets, or just the issues around that. But the United Church tries as far as possible to maintain confidentiality in the application and interview process. And that's because if a minister is testing a call to another place, not sure that they're leaving where they are currently, and their congregation where they're now serving learns that they're looking at other positions, that often results in a change in the pastoral relationship. And that can eventually lead to the ending anyway. And so we try to maintain confidentiality as much as we can. And that's difficult often. And especially, I think, in small towns where you want to show the person the town, and as you're doing that, you happen to run into members of the congregation. Oh, who's this with you? And so just want you to be aware of why it's important to honor confidentiality and to respect that for the ministry people you're interviewing. We're going to do, it's going to be a romp through Church Hub, okay, next week. And so you're welcome to come back. Thank you for the time you've given this evening. Lots of information. Notes from last week are ready and just need to be sent out to you. And we'll do the same, prepare some notes from this evening as well. So, friends, blessings on you in whatever awaits you tomorrow. But before then, the blessings of good sleep to you. And thank you for, again, for your time and for your interest in learning about this. And remember that the Spirit is around you always, and that you are a beloved child of God. Thank you. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.